The grand mansion stood tall under the soft glow of the evening lights. Its walls were made of polished stone, gleaming in the fading sunlight, and the gardens outside were filled with vibrant flowers, carefully trimmed hedges, and sparkling fountains that reflected the golden sky. The mansion belonged to an aristocrat who was known throughout the city for his immense wealth and his extravagant parties. Every corner of the house told a story of luxury, from the crystal chandeliers hanging from high ceilings to the intricate paintings that lined the walls, each one a masterpiece collected over decades. Tonight, another party was being held, one that promised to be the most spectacular of the season. Inside the mansion, the air was filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Guests, dressed in their finest attire, moved gracefully across the polished marble floors, exchanging smiles and polite compliments. Laughter floated gently through the air, mingling with the faint strains of music that came from a small orchestra in the corner of the room. The aristocrat moved among his guests with an air of authority, a faint smile on his lips, enjoying the admiration and respect that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He was a man who had everything one could imagine: wealth, power, and influence, and yet he had a sharp edge to his personality that kept everyone in a careful balance of fear and respect. Among the many servants working tirelessly to ensure the evening ran smoothly was a young maid. She moved quietly, her steps light on the marble floor as she carried trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres to the guests. Her uniform was simple, neat, and unassuming, blending into the background as she went about her work. She had a calm presence, one that did not demand attention but somehow caught the eye of those who noticed the small, graceful movements she made while working. Despite her quiet nature, there was a certain poise in the way she carried herself, a subtle confidence that hinted at talents unseen. The maid had worked in the mansion for several months now. She knew the routines, the expectations, and the subtle rules that governed the aristocrat's household. Every day was a test of patience and skill, but she had learned to navigate the demands without drawing unnecessary attention to herself. She had no desire to be in the spotlight. Her life was simple and she preferred it that way. Yet, she carried with her a secret, a talent that she had nurtured in private, away from the world's eyes. She could play the piano, not just with competence, but with a passion and skill that could move anyone who listened. It was a part of her that belonged only to her, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with the mansion or its master. As the evening progressed, the aristocrat wandered near the grand piano that stood proudly in one corner of the main hall. It was a magnificent instrument, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier lights, its keys pristine and inviting. He glanced at the maid as she passed by, noting her quiet composure and the careful way she balanced the tray of drinks. A mischievous thought crossed his mind, one that was meant to amuse him at the expense of another. He had always enjoyed moments where he could demonstrate his control, moments where he could test the people around him and remind them of their place in his world. The guests continued their conversations, unaware of the tension that was about to unfold. The aristocrat's eyes followed the maid as she moved across the room, her presence unassuming yet subtly commanding in its own quiet way. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of a few nearby guests, and then spoke in a voice that carried easily through the room. The aristocrat stood back for a moment, trying to regain his composure. He had expected a stumble, a nervous mistake, or some evidence that the maid was not suited for the grandeur of the party. But what he saw instead left him quietly unsettled. The guests were leaning slightly forward in their seats, eyes wide, hands frozen over champagne glasses. Some had even set down their drinks, mesmerized by the flow of music from the piano. The maid, seemingly ordinary just moments ago, was now the center of attention, commanding the room without a single word. She had always known the piano could express what words never could. Her childhood had been spent near music, her parents teaching her melodies and harmonies with patient guidance. She had practiced for hours each day, her fingers moving with precision and care over the keys. It was a skill cultivated in private, a secret world away from the eyes of those who might not understand. And now, standing at the piano in the aristocrat's grand hall, that secret was coming alive in a way she could never have imagined when she first began playing as a child. The aristocrat's initial intention had been clear. He had meant to humiliate her in front of the audience, to show that no matter how she carried herself, she was just a maid. His mind had already painted the scenario of polite laughter and whispers of pity as she fumbled through the music. But the reality was different. The notes she played were steady and sure, each one precise and expressive. There was no trace of fear or hesitation in her performance. Every chord, every flourish, seemed to carry a story, a depth of emotion that touched everyone present. Some of the guests exchanged glances, recognizing a rare talent unfolding before them. A few whispered quietly to each other, unable to contain their amazement. This was not the typical performance one expected at an aristocratic party. It was raw, genuine, and beautifully imperfect in a way that made it human and deeply moving. The maid's music filled the room, wrapping around every listener, making them feel as if they had been transported out of the grand hall into a private world of melody and emotion. The aristocrat's face betrayed a flicker of doubt. He could not have anticipated that what he had intended as an act of control would instead reveal brilliance. His eyes, sharp and calculating moments before, now showed an unfamiliar hesitation. The more she played, the more he realized that he had underestimated her entirely. The guests, who had expected a small spectacle of failure, were instead witnessing a display that demanded respect. The music was not just technically correct. It carried life, passion, and a maturity beyond what anyone had imagined a maid could possess. The maid continued, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. She was aware of the eyes upon her but did not let them dictate her playing. Instead, she allowed the music to guide her, each note flowing naturally from her mind to her hands, from her hands to the piano, and finally into the ears and hearts of those listening. There was a rhythm in her performance, a delicate balance of tension and release that made the room feel as if it were breathing along with her. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful, every crescendo building a sense of wonder. The aristocrat felt a strange mixture of admiration and frustration. Part of him wanted to look away, to avoid confronting the reality that his plan had failed. Another part could not deny the skill and the artistry in front of him. The guests had moved beyond polite interest. Some were leaning closer to hear the subtleties of her playing. Others were closing their eyes to fully absorb the music. The laughter and light chatter that had filled the room earlier had completely vanished, replaced by the awe and attention that only true talent could command. As the music progressed, a shift occurred in the atmosphere. The tension that had hung over the room, rooted in the aristocrat's expectation of embarrassment, transformed into an energy of anticipation. Each guest seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what the maid would do next. And yet, there was no sign of nervousness in her. She played as if the piano itself was an extension of her own being, channeling every emotion with clarity and purpose. The beauty of the performance was not in perfection alone but in its honesty. It was human, relatable, and inspiring. The aristocrat's ego, accustomed to unquestioned control, had taken a hit. He realized that power over people could not dictate the outcomes of every situation, especially not when talent and inner strength were involved. He had tried to orchestrate a moment to prove superiority, but instead, he had become a silent witness to the maid's brilliance. His mind raced as he considered the implications of what was happening. The guests, too, were reconsidering their assumptions. The maid, who had been invisible in the eyes of many, was now undeniable. The music swelled, carrying with it a richness that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. The maid's movements were fluid and natural, her expression serene yet focused. Every note seemed to resonate with personal significance, telling stories of her life, her experiences, and her resilience. The guests felt it, even if they could not name the emotions. Some were moved to tears, others to silent smiles, and all were compelled to listen closely. The aristocrat, standing near the piano, felt a strange sense of humility creeping in. He could not orchestrate or command this talent. It existed independently, demanding recognition. Throughout the performance, the maid remained composed. She did not look at the guests, nor did she seek validation. Her focus was entirely on the music, and in doing so, she commanded more respect than any words or gestures could achieve. The audience, initially expecting an amusing spectacle, now experienced a powerful demonstration of skill, patience, and courage. This was not entertainment. It was a statement. It was proof that appearances could be deceiving and that talent and dedication often reside where they are least expected. The aristocrat's hands, once lightly tapping in anticipation, now hung by his sides. He had lost the narrative he had intended to control. The maid's performance transcended his expectations and, in a quiet but undeniable way, redefined the evening. The contrast between his authority and her unassuming presence was stark. Where he had wielded wealth and power, she now wielded skill and confidence. The room had shifted from a place of hierarchy to a space where talent spoke louder than status. Time seemed to stretch as she played, every second drawing the audience deeper into the music. The notes, carefully chosen and delivered, formed a story that was personal yet universal. The guests were no longer merely observers. They were participants in the experience. Every chord struck a chord within them, evoking memories, emotions, and reflections that had nothing to do with the grand party itself, but everything to do with the human connection music could create. The aristocrat, though reluctant, found himself caught in the same spell, momentarily forgetting the social constructs that had always guided him. As the final phrases echoed in the grand hall, there was a pause, a collective intake of breath that hung in the air. The silence was powerful, filled with awe and wonder. The maid's fingers lifted from the keys, and she looked up, meeting the eyes of the aristocrat for the first time during the performance. There was no triumph in her gaze, no arrogance, only quiet confidence and self-assuredness. She had faced an impossible expectation and had turned it into an undeniable display of her talent. The aristocrat's expression softened, though subtly. He had witnessed a reality he could not ignore. The guests, recovering from the spell of music, erupted in applause. It started slowly, polite and measured, and then swelled into genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Cheers and compliments rang out, and some guests approached her to express their admiration. Even those who had mocked the idea initially were forced to acknowledge the brilliance that had unfolded before them. The maid, while maintaining her composure, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Her private talent had been revealed, not for vanity, but as a testament to her courage, skill, and the quiet strength she carried within. The aristocrat, still standing near the piano, realized that this moment had changed the dynamics of the evening. What was meant to be a display of dominance had instead become a celebration of talent and resilience. The maid had transformed a challenge into an opportunity, revealing a depth of character and ability that no amount of social expectation could diminish. The guests would remember this night, not for the lavishness of the party, but for the extraordinary and unexpected brilliance of someone they had overlooked. And in that recognition lay a lesson, subtle yet profound, about humility, respect, and the power of unseen talent. The applause continued to echo through the grand hall, but the maid did not rush to respond. She remained seated at the piano for a few moments, allowing the sounds to linger, soaking in the atmosphere that had completely shifted around her. What had begun as an ordinary evening of social display had transformed into something extraordinary. The music had not only captured the attention of the guests, but it had also revealed a side of her that no one in the aristocrat's world had ever imagined. For a moment, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She had turned what could have been humiliation into a declaration of her talent and composure. The aristocrat, standing a few feet away, struggled to regain his sense of control. He had hosted countless parties, seen many performances, and always maintained the upper hand. But this was different. This was not about wealth, status, or influence. This was about skill, confidence, and presence, and she had them in a way that could not be overshadowed. The room had shifted subtly, with the audience now looking at her not as a servant, but as an individual with remarkable ability. He felt a strange blend of surprise and unease, a feeling that he had not expected at his own party. Guests began to rise, moving closer to the piano. their expressions a mix of admiration and disbelief. Some whispered quietly, commenting on the unexpected brilliance of the maid's playing. They had all anticipated something entertaining in a superficial sense, a light-hearted diversion. Instead, they had witnessed a performance that was deeply moving and unforgettable. Their expectations had been challenged, their assumptions questioned, and their respect won. The energy in the room had changed. There was a hum of excitement and awe that could not be ignored. The maid, aware of the attention but not overwhelmed by it, allowed herself to relax slightly. Her hands hovered above the keys as she prepared for another piece, one she had practiced countless times in the privacy of her room. This was her comfort zone, the music she had poured herself into, the compositions that carried her emotions and memories. She began to play, this time with more freedom and expression. Each note seemed to have its own voice, telling a story that transcended the ordinary, resonating with every person in the room. The aristocrat watched closely, noting the shift in the audience. He realized that his initial plan to embarrass her had not only failed but had also elevated her in the eyes of everyone present. The guests were captivated, leaning in to catch every subtle nuance, hanging on every movement of her fingers. Some were moved to tears, others to quiet smiles of admiration. The maid's performance had created a connection, a shared experience that transcended social boundaries. It was no longer about who she was or where she came from. It was about the music and the emotional impact it carried. As she continued, the aristocrat felt a mixture of emotions he had rarely experienced. Part of him was proud, almost involuntarily, of the talent displayed before him. Another part wrestled with frustration, realizing that his attempt to control the situation had been outmaneuvered by her skill. He had expected a display of humility and subordination, but instead, he had witnessed mastery and confidence. The contrast was stark, and it forced him to reconsider the assumptions he had made about her and about those he considered beneath him. The guests began to react more openly. Conversations hushed, replaced by whispers of amazement and admiration. Some approached the piano to compliment her, while others simply watched, captivated by the performance. The aristocrat could no longer ignore the transformation that had occurred. The maid, who had been invisible moments ago, had become the highlight of the evening. Her music had the power to command attention, evoke emotion, and earn respect in a way that social standing could not. It was a revelation, both to the audience and to the aristocrat himself. The maid's confidence grew with each passing moment. She had expected fear and embarrassment, but instead, she felt a sense of liberation. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a platform for her voice, a medium through which she could express her deepest emotions and communicate with those around her. The music flowed naturally, each phrase building upon the last, creating a tapestry of sound that resonated throughout the hall. The audience was fully engaged, caught in the rhythm, harmony, and emotion that she produced effortlessly. The aristocrat, observing silently, felt a shift within himself. He had always believed that wealth and power could dictate outcomes and control situations. Yet, here was a reminder that true talent and inner strength could not be commanded or diminished. His carefully maintained authority seemed insignificant compared to the quiet brilliance he was witnessing. The realization was humbling, a lesson in perspective and respect that he had not anticipated learning that evening. The maid transitioned smoothly from one piece to another, demonstrating not only technical skill but also an emotional depth that left the audience in awe. Each composition seemed to tell a story, revealing facets of her personality, her experiences, and her resilience. The music was compelling, drawing listeners in and encouraging them to connect with the emotions being expressed. The aristocrat could see the effect it had on the guests. Their admiration was genuine, their attention focused entirely on her and her talent. The performance continued, and the room became a space where social hierarchies faded into irrelevance. The audience was no longer concerned with status, wealth, or influence. They were captivated by the artistry unfolding before them. The maid, with her quiet presence and extraordinary skill, had become the focal point of the evening. The aristocrat, usually at the center of attention, found himself observing rather than directing. The balance of power had shifted subtly but unmistakably. As the music reached its climax, the intensity in the room grew. Every note was deliberate, every chord resonated with meaning, and the audience was completely immersed. The maid's performance was not just a demonstration of talent. It was a declaration of confidence, resilience, and self-expression. The aristocrat could no longer pretend that his intentions had succeeded. He had attempted to humiliate her, but she had turned the moment into one of inspiration and awe. The lesson was clear. Skill, composure, and inner strength could not be underestimated. The final notes lingered in the air, and the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, applause erupted, first slowly and then growing into a full, enthusiastic response. The guests clapped, cheered, and approached her to express their admiration. Even those who had doubted her abilities found themselves compelled to acknowledge the extraordinary talent they had witnessed. The maid, slightly flushed but composed, stood and offered a graceful nod to the audience, her dignity intact and her confidence strengthened. The aristocrat, for the first time that evening, felt a sense of humility. He had tried to orchestrate a moment of control and had instead been shown the power of authenticity and talent. He could not undo what had been revealed, nor could he deny the impact it had on the guests and on himself. The evening had transformed from a display of wealth and status into a celebration of human potential, skill, and resilience. As the night continued, conversations among the guests centered not on the aristocrat's influence or the opulence of the mansion, but on the maid's performance. Her music had become the story of the evening, a shared memory that would be recounted long after the party ended. She returned to her duties, her composure unshaken, but inside, she carried a quiet triumph. She had faced the possibility of embarrassment and emerged with her talent and dignity fully intact. The aristocrat, observing this, realized that he had witnessed a moment that could not be controlled or diminished, a reminder that true ability often resides in unexpected places and that respect must be earned, not demanded. The music had finished, but the energy it left in the grand hall lingered like a gentle breeze, touching everyone in a quiet, powerful way. Guests were still murmuring in amazement, discussing what they had just witnessed. Some could hardly believe that someone who had served quietly among them all this time possessed such incredible talent. The maid, though she had returned to her duties, could feel the lingering attention and admiration from everyone in the room. She had not sought it, but it had come naturally, and she accepted it with quiet grace. The aristocrat stood nearby, absorbing the scene with a mixture of emotions he had never felt at a party before. Pride, though reluctant, mingled with frustration and surprise. He had expected amusement at the maid's expense, but she had effortlessly taken the spotlight, commanding respect without arrogance or pretense. His ego had been challenged in a way he could not deny, and it left him contemplating the way he treated those around him. Power and authority had their place, but they were no match for talent, courage, and composure. Guests were slowly beginning to approach the maid, offering words of praise and genuine admiration. Their voices were soft but filled with warmth, expressing awe at what she had just accomplished. Some spoke of the emotion conveyed in her playing, while others commented on the precision and technical skill that was clearly evident in every note. The atmosphere, once tense and expectant, had transformed into one of respect, curiosity, and inspiration. The maid remained composed, nodding politely and thanking those who complimented her. She did not boast or seek recognition. Her satisfaction came from the fact that she had faced the challenge and excelled. The aristocrat watched this unfold and felt a profound lesson settle in. He had always believed that control, wealth, and position could shape perception and dictate respect, but he had been reminded that true talent and inner strength cannot be commanded. The maid's courage to perform under pressure and her mastery of the piano had earned her genuine admiration from those who mattered, not because of her social status, but because of her skill and composure. He realized that he had misjudged her and, in doing so, underestimated the power of human potential. As the guests continued to express their admiration, A few of them began to ask questions about her background and training. They were eager to know how someone who appeared so ordinary could possess such extraordinary ability. The maid responded with humility, sharing small details about her years of practice, the dedication it had taken, and the joy she found in music. She spoke simply and naturally, allowing her passion to shine through without exaggeration or drama. The audience listened intently, drawn not only to her talent, but also to her sincerity and authenticity. The aristocrat, who had initially intended to demonstrate his authority, found himself quietly reflecting on his own behavior. He had attempted to orchestrate a moment to embarrass her, believing that his social power could dictate outcomes. Yet here he was witnessing a complete reversal. She had taken what could have been a moment of shame and turned it into an experience of triumph, respect, and admiration. The lesson was subtle but undeniable. True skill and confidence could never be diminished by social hierarchy or expectation. The maid, feeling the weight of the moment, allowed herself a brief glance at the aristocrat. Their eyes met, and for the first time he did not look commanding or dismissive. Instead, there was recognition, acknowledgement of her skill, her courage, and her poise. He said nothing, but the subtle shift in his demeanor did not go unnoticed by the audience. It was as if he had learned something essential in that quiet exchange, a lesson in respect and humility that could not be taught through wealth or authority alone. The guests, now relaxed and inspired, continued to approach her with questions and compliments. Many expressed astonishment at the depth of emotion she had conveyed through her music, remarking on the rare combination of technical skill and heartfelt expression. Some had attended countless high society events, but none had ever witnessed such a display of raw talent combined with genuine human presence. The maid's performance had created a memorable experience that transcended social rank, leaving everyone with a sense of awe and inspiration. Throughout the evening, she maintained her composure, balancing her duties with the attention she had received. She did not seek to dominate the room or prove herself further. The recognition was enough. She had shown that her abilities were not confined by her position, that talent and courage could shine regardless of circumstance. The aristocrat, observing quietly, realized that her performance had redefined the expectations he had for those around him. He could not ignore the impact she had made, nor could he diminish her achievement. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. Where there had been polite chatter, whispers of expectation, and subtle judgment, there was now an open appreciation for authenticity, skill, and dedication. The guests were engaged in meaningful conversations, reflecting on the performance and the unexpected lesson it had brought. The maid's music had become the central topic, overshadowing the wealth and opulence that had initially been the focus of the evening. It was a testament to the idea that true talent speaks louder than social standing or pretense. As the night progressed, the aristocrat approached the maid, his steps measured and deliberate. He did not speak immediately, instead observing the calm dignity with which she carried herself. When he finally spoke, his tone was quieter, less commanding than usual. He acknowledged the skill she had displayed, offering a brief but sincere compliment. The gesture was small, yet it carried a weight of respect and recognition that had been absent before the performance. The maid accepted it with a simple nod, understanding that her talent had earned acknowledgement without the need for grandeur or praise. The guests continued to engage with her, some requesting small performances or demonstrations, while others simply expressed admiration. She accommodated each request gracefully, maintaining a balance between her duties and the attention she had garnered. The aristocrat observed all of this, realizing that the evening had been transformed by a single act of courage and skill. The maid's performance had shifted the dynamic of the entire gathering, creating a memorable moment that would be remembered long after the party ended. The maid's music had not only captured the attention of the aristocrat and the guests, but had also sparked a quiet sense of reflection. Many began to reconsider their assumptions about talent, hierarchy, and the expectations placed upon individuals. The evening had become a celebration of human potential, a reminder that skill and courage often reside where they are least expected. The aristocrat, in particular, felt a subtle but lasting impact. He had learned that authority and wealth could not dictate the outcomes of every situation, and that humility and respect were earned, not demanded. By the end of the evening, the maid had returned to her duties, her composure intact, yet carrying a quiet sense of accomplishment and validation. The guests had dispersed, many still discussing the extraordinary performance they had witnessed. The aristocrat, who had initially sought to assert dominance, found himself reflecting on the lessons of the night. He had seen firsthand the power of talent, confidence, and courage, and the way they could transform a situation beyond expectation. The maid, through her music, had reshaped the narrative of the evening, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. The night concluded with a sense of quiet satisfaction for those who had witnessed the performance. The maid's talent had not only entertained but had also inspired. The aristocrat, standing silently, absorbed the final moments with a new perspective. He had been reminded that true skill and composure are beyond the reach of manipulation and control. The evening had shifted from a display of power and hierarchy to a celebration of human potential and dignity, with the maid at the center, commanding respect through her art, courage, and unwavering presence. The evening had grown late, and the mansion was slowly quieting down. Guests had either left or gathered in small groups to discuss the night's events, and the once lively grand hall now held a sense of calm. The music, which had captivated everyone earlier, still seemed to hang in the air, a lingering reminder of the extraordinary performance that had taken place. The maid moved quietly among the remaining guests, carrying trays and attending to simple duties, but there was a lightness in her step, a quiet pride in the poise she had maintained throughout the evening. The aristocrat watched her from across the room, reflecting on the lessons of the night. His initial plan to embarrass her had not only failed but had been entirely reversed. She had turned a moment of potential humiliation into one of awe, admiration, and respect. Her talent, skill, and composure had won over the audience and had forced him to see the truth he had long ignored: that authority and status cannot command respect in the same way true ability and confidence can. The realization was humbling, and he found himself quietly acknowledging it in his thoughts. Guests who had remained were still speaking of the performance in low, awed tones. They commented on her technique, her emotion, and the rare ability to communicate through music so profoundly. Many were astonished that someone who had seemed so ordinary in daily duties could possess such extraordinary skill. The maid, while performing her tasks, listened politely and accepted their admiration with humility. She did not boast, but her quiet dignity spoke volumes, reinforcing the impression that her talent was paired with character. The aristocrat finally approached her, the weight of the evening's events evident in his posture. He spoke in a voice quieter than usual, acknowledging the brilliance she had displayed. His words were sincere, lacking the usual arrogance or expectation of deference that had characterized his behavior throughout the night. For the first time, he recognized that he had underestimated her. The maid nodded graciously, accepting the acknowledgement without fanfare. Her composure remained unshaken, and she felt a quiet sense of triumph for having faced the challenge with poise and skill. The atmosphere in the mansion had shifted completely. Where there had once been subtle hierarchies and careful politeness, there was now a sense of shared respect and admiration for the maid's abilities. Her performance had become the defining moment of the evening, overshadowing wealth, social status, and even the grandeur of the mansion itself. Guests continued to speak of the music, recalling specific passages, and sharing how they had felt while listening. It was clear that her talent had left a lasting impression on everyone present. The aristocrat, reflecting quietly, understood that the evening had changed his perspective. He had always believed that power, influence, and control could shape perception and command respect. Yet here, in the presence of genuine skill and composure, he saw the limits of that power. The maid had achieved something that no wealth or status could grant: authentic admiration earned through talent and character. It was a subtle but profound lesson, one that he would carry forward long after the evening ended. As the night drew to a close, the maid returned to the piano for a final, simple piece. She played quietly, without ceremony, allowing the music to flow naturally and gracefully. The remaining guests gathered nearby, some standing, some seated, all captivated by the serenity and elegance of her playing. This was not a performance meant to impress or challenge, but a personal expression, a quiet reflection that allowed everyone to experience the depth of her talent once more. The aristocrat observed silently, a newfound respect in his eyes, recognizing that the impact of her music extended far beyond a single evening. The final notes faded into the soft echoes of the grand hall, leaving a profound silence. The guests stood quietly, reflecting on what they had witnessed, and then slowly began to express their appreciation. Applause rose again, softer this time, but filled with sincerity and admiration. The maid stood, her composure intact, acknowledging the appreciation with a gentle nod. She had shown that talent, courage, and character could shine in the most unlikely circumstances, leaving a mark that would not be forgotten. The aristocrat took a step closer, offering a few more words of genuine respect. He admitted that he had misjudged her, and that her skill and composure had left him impressed. The maid received his words with grace, understanding the significance of the acknowledgement. She did not need further praise. The moment itself was validation enough. She had faced the potential for embarrassment and had transformed it into a display of excellence and dignity. Guests continued to reflect on the evening, recounting moments of the performance, discussing the subtle emotional nuances, and sharing their admiration. The story of the maid's talent would likely be retold for many gatherings to come, a reminder of the unexpected brilliance that can exist quietly beneath the surface. The atmosphere had shifted from superficiality and hierarchy to recognition and respect, a testament to the power of skill, confidence, and authenticity. The aristocrat, watching the scene, felt a sense of humility and reflection. He had been reminded that authority and influence could not guarantee admiration or respect, and that assumptions about others were often misguided. The maid's talent and composure had created an unforgettable evening, reshaping the perception of those around her and challenging the social expectations he had long relied upon. He realized that true respect is earned, not demanded, and that genuine skill and confidence can surpass wealth, power, and status in their ability to leave a lasting impression. As the last guests departed, the mansion quieted once more. The maid, though still carrying out her duties, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced a situation that could have been humiliating and had emerged with dignity, skill, and respect. Her performance had not only revealed her talent to others, but had also changed the way she was perceived, demonstrating the power of courage, preparation, and composure in any circumstance. The aristocrat, observing this, was left with a lasting lesson about humility, perception, and the true measure of character. In the quiet of the mansion, after the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, the maid allowed herself a moment to reflect. She thought of the journey that had brought her here. The years of private practice, the patience, the discipline, and the quiet moments of self-belief. The evening had been a test, and she had passed not for applause or recognition, but because she had remained true to herself and her abilities. The memory of her performance, the impact it had on the guests, and the subtle shift in the aristocrat's perspective would stay with her, a reminder of what can be achieved when talent meets courage. The aristocrat, standing alone for a moment in the grand hall, considered the lesson of the night. He had attempted to use his position to orchestrate a moment of control, but he had been outshone by talent and character. The experience was humbling, a reminder that skill and confidence could never be diminished by social expectation or hierarchy. It was a night that would remain in his memory, not for the grandeur of his home or the wealth displayed, but for the unexpected brilliance of someone he had underestimated. He had learned, in a quiet but profound way, the power of respect, authenticity, and the extraordinary potential hidden within those often overlooked. As the mansion finally settled into silence, the maid returned to her room, her thoughts filled with quiet satisfaction. She had transformed a challenge into a triumph, demonstrating the power of preparation, courage, and authenticity. Her talent had spoken for itself, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The aristocrat, too, would carry the lesson forward, a reminder that respect and admiration are earned through skill and character, not wealth or position. The evening had ended, but the impact of the performance, and the subtle shift in perception it created, would remain long after the lights had dimmed.